shall we make a start and then let people come in the background? Or yeah, happy to do that?
let's make a start. Yeah.
Okay, well then without further ado, hello everyone and welcome to our first PhDiscuss live webinar. Today's topic is self-representation in the research environment. Can the academic research community ever be truly diverse? So first of all, we'd just like to thank you all so much for attending this webinar. We've been completely overwhelmed by the support from the panelists, our peers, by the applicants, and of course by you guys who have taken time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. So thank you. Move on to our next slide. So PhDiscuss was created by 3 PhD students from the University of Manchester, Robert Bagley, Davide Verdolino, and myself, Leona Ogene. And the aim of this webinar series was to create a comfortable and open environment to discuss sensitive topics related to equality, diversity, and inclusion, which may affect PhD students during their doctorate. And also, we wanted to be able to provide practical advice and ideas on how to tackle these issues. Today, we have a diverse panel of researchers with us, and they're here to share their personal and thought-provoking experiences from their academic journey. Our panelists will be discussing the impacts of diversity in areas related to queerness, ethnicity, nationality, gender, and disability. Unfortunately, Dr. Phoebe Jean-Pierre, who some of you may have seen advertised last week, has been unable to attend today due to illness, so she won't be speaking today. But before I introduce the panel to all of you, I'd just like to go over some quick housekeeping. So some of you may have seen this before already, but for those of you that haven't done so, please remember to mute your lines during the webinar and also turn off your camera. We require you to hide non-video participants, which can be done in the following steps, which are illustrated on the screen. And this just allows us to make sure only the panelists are viewed during the webinar, during the discussion portion of the webinar. And lastly, if you select gallery view, this will give you the best view of the panelists during the discussion. So I'll just give a few minutes to anyone who hasn't done that already, although I think everyone's managed that. If anyone is having any issues hiding the non-video participants, just drop us a message and we'll help you with that. So in this webinar, we'll spend most of our time in discussion with the panelists, and this will be moderated by Rob, but there will be opportunities for audience participation in the form of polls during the discussion, and we'll also have a Q&A session at the end, led by Davide, where you can share your comments or ask the panel any questions or raise any of your own concerns. So we encourage you to use the chat box to send your questions or comments to us, and then they'll be answered in the Q&A session. If you want to anonymize anything you say, you can do that simply by removing your name on Zoom. And one final note before I introduce the panelists is that this webinar is going to be recorded for on-demand viewing. So without further ado, let's introduce our 4 panelists. So first up, we have Mia Brantley-Wright. Mia is a doctoral candidate in the field of sociology at the University of South Carolina. Mia's academic work lies at the intersection of race, gender, and family, where she examines how the interplay between race and gender shapes the well-being of Black families. More specifically, her dissertation explores how children's experiences of racism impacts Black maternal health, which has been awarded 2 internal grants towards the completion of study. Next up, we have Lauren Taylor. Lauren is a 4th-year PhD student based in the School of Chemistry at the University of Manchester. Lauren is looking at the design and synthesis of supramolecular architectures and the formation of site-selective metal-organic complexes. Again, next up we have Joel Yupanqui-Mieles. Joel was awarded a full scholarship from the Ecuadorian government under the Top 50 World Universities Programme for high achieving students. Joel chose to study mechanical engineering at the University of Manchester. He then became an advanced manufacturing engineer at Jaguar Land Rover before returning to Ecuador as a product manager of a biomedical engineering firm. He is now in the second year of his PhD in mechanical engineering with a full scholarship awarded in 2019 by Matoki Holdings and the University of Manchester. And our final panelist, Helena Raymond Haling. Helena's research career began in the physics department at the University of Bristol, studying iridescent plants and their enhanced photosynthetic capabilities. Using computational modeling, Helena quantifies the microstructures of soft tissues and makes predictions about their biomechanical function. They have created an algorithm for tracking tendon collagen fibrils in 3D and building reconstructions. Currently, Helena is working to uncover the mechanism which governs the regulation of the precise architecture of tendons during development. So a big warm hello to Mia, Lauren, Joel, and Helena. So a massive welcome to all of you. I'll now hand over to Rob, who'll be moderating the panel in this discussion.
Thank you, Leona, and hello, everybody. And yes, please, panelists, have on your videos. Perfect. Everyone's up. So let's begin the discussion. So today's keyword is diversity. Now, diversity has different meanings to different people, and it is often associated with visible differences in a group, such as ethnicity, age, and gender. However, it also encompasses differences we can't always see, such as sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, disabilities, and many more. Now, before I open the floor to our panelists, we're actually going to start with our first of 3 polls that the audience can participate in. And these polls are all anonymous and optional, and we will reveal the results of each poll after our panel finishes discussing a question. And I believe our first poll is up now. So if everyone could submit their answers to that as we progress, that would be excellent. And with that, let's hear from our panelists for the first time. So hello, panelists. I'd like to begin by asking you all, how diverse do you think your PhD group is in terms of race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual identity, and disability? Lauren, if you could start us off, please.
Yeah, so I would say that my PhD group is somewhat diverse in that we have a mixture of both women and men. We also have a supervisor, which is a woman, which is pretty rare to get in chemistry itself. We also have people that identify with different sexual orientations, and we have people who come from more working class backgrounds like myself, and then we also have people who come from more middle class backgrounds. But I think, as usual, we are all white, and I think that's the main thing, especially when it comes to academia and chemistry. So I think it is quite a bit easier nowadays to find a more diverse research group in terms of different sexes and different sexual orientations. But again, I think it's much harder to find people of colour in chemistry, and I think that's yeah, really frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely agree. For me, my research group, there's only, again, male predominance. At least 80 to 90% of my group is male. And same for race. There's no real any Black representation in our group. Most of it, like I said, is white, and there's no real representation for places all around the globe. You know, there's always the same little groups that are formed. For example, Asian predominance, which is the most diversity that we get. So in terms of the visible ones, I will say not really. My group is not really diverse.
Yeah, I think that in research generally, we have to be kind of careful about how we think about diversity, because science, well, from a science background, so I'll just talk about what I know, is so international. We recruit students and postdocs from all around the world. You can quite readily like produce, you know, like a poster with like, you know, lots of visible diversity. But if we look specifically among researchers and academics that are come up through the UK higher education system, there's obviously lots of work to be done. This isn't entirely the fault of, you know, academia. There are structural barriers in place for, you know, for example, like specifically young Black children being excluded from schools right from the beginning and having increased barriers to accessing the education needed to succeed in academia. With regards to LGBT individuals, I know of a handful of early career researchers who do identify as LGBT+. I don't feel like this is super uncommon. I don't think this is reflected in the older generations, in both in age and in, like, you know, career stage as well. Yeah, and I don't know any other trans or gender non-conforming students or researchers, so I don't feel like this is a big thing generally. In terms of like hidden disability, yeah, in terms of like disability, I have dyspraxia, which does actually impact my work quite a lot. And I don't really feel like hidden disabilities specifically are that well understood in academia and in wider culture as well. So I don't tend to talk about it enough or as much as I would really need to in an ideal world. So I think, yeah, we could definitely do better on disability literacy.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Helena shared just about in the beginning of being careful when it comes to how we can speak about diversity. Because for me, you know, in sociology, being part of the social sciences, I think it's very easy and often assumed on the surface level, like, oh, of course, sociology would be super diverse, right? Of course, the social sciences are diverse. And we do have, just within that space, people of differing races and ethnicities and, you know, SES and differing sexualities and all of these different, you know, identities that we tend to think of surrounding diversity. But as a sociologist, I also think very structurally as well. And so we have to pay attention to the foundation and the history that these institutions were built on, right? So particularly within the context of the US, thinking about these structural barriers that Helena alluded to, right? So like people of color not being able to be a part of these institutions, women, right? People of lower socioeconomic statuses. We can think of it not being welcoming to people of differing sexualities, right? Like all of these different spaces historically. So then when we come to present day, sure, we have on this surface level, an aspect of diversity, but in that same vein, is this space inclusive, right? If historically these marginalized groups have not been welcomed into this space, then what does it look like when they get into this space, right? And I think we can see, you know, and I will say sociology, of course, has made great progress. So this is not a knock on sociology, I'm a sociologist, but rather this is just critical engagement of the discipline, right? And so when thinking about the different ways in which we teach, our pedagogy, what are the ways that we're engaging with our research questions? What are the ways that we're, or what type of readings are we giving to people, right? Is it inclusive, right? What is the canon? Is it inclusive, or is it simply just on the surface diverse and there is no people of color in your readings? There are no women or queer people in part of your syllabus and things like that, right? So thinking about all of the ways where we can be diverse on the surface, but it's not an inclusive space for all people and marginalized folks in general.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you, panelists, for your first contributions. So yes, I come from a science and engineering background, and it is easy to look from an outside perspective at social sciences and just assume that diversity and inclusion would be better integrated by virtue of their subject matter. But your insight has clearly indicated that it's not necessarily the full story. So very valuable info there. Before we move on to our next question, I believe we are going to look at the results of our first poll. And here we go. So in answer to the question, do you feel represented in your research group? We've got a pretty even split there, 25 saying they are and 18 saying that they aren't. So thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation in that poll. There'll be a couple more to come. So panelists, now that we have an idea on the types of diversity that are present or absent in your research groups, I'll be interested to hear your stance on diversity, as well as look at the positive impact diversity has had on your research lives. So we'll continue where we left off with Mia, and my question to you all is, in your opinion, what are the benefits of diversity in the academic research environment?
Yeah, so the benefits of diversity, right, are vast. I could talk a really long time about that, but I feel like I just talked a lot, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be brief. But you know, one of the things that really sticks out to me in the moment is just the ability to learn from people of different backgrounds, right? And we can learn from them in an academic sense, right? Like different research agendas, you know, differing interests when it comes to what we're studying and different things like that. But also just on the personal level, it really helps you to understand people because, you know, our identities and all of these different aspects of us helps us see the world differently, right? It impacts how each of us kind of view our environment and our surroundings. So being able to learn from one another and learn, you know, from a perspective that maybe I've never thought of, or maybe I've never been introduced to is useful, obviously, like I mentioned, at the academic level, but also at the personal level as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Mia. I think one of the best things about doing a PhD is being able to meet so many different people from so many different backgrounds. And I guess because you're working in an office together, and then with science subjects as well, you're working in the lab together, you're together all the time. And so you talk a lot, you know, and you learn so much about other people's cultures, about their languages, about their food, just about everyday things that you wouldn't have known unless you were working in such close proximity to people. So like, for example, when I was in my master's year, there was quite a few Spanish people in the group that I was working in. And I just learned so much about, I guess, Spain in general and Spanish food and stuff like that, and the language. And I feel like it really made me want to learn Spanish. And it's just little things like that that have such an impact on you. And it's also really nice as well to have people similar to you. So like if you have other people in your group that are from, say, the same socioeconomic background as you, it can be really nice, I guess, when you are feeling maybe out of your depth or feeling really like you're kind of the only person from that type of background. It's nice to have other people around you that understand kind of, I guess, the things you've been through because of that. And so, yeah, it can be just nice to have someone there to relate to.
Absolutely, I agree. Once you find or identify someone in your research group that even looks like you or has some similar background, like you both said, it's easier to identify yourself there, exchange ideas, so which is crucial for research, being in constant collaboration with your peers. And that only happens when you actually feel comfortable. And that's some things that diversity brings to the table. It makes everyone in the group, even from the PI, principal investigators, and everyone, feel comfortable and open about their identities. And like Mia said, it's crucial for us to share from where we come from. We've gone through different struggles to get to where we are, which makes us solve problems in different ways. So that creativity is another huge factor that diversity brings into the table. So I believe it's crucial to have a wide range of individuals from different backgrounds to put this on together into research.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Joel. There's kind of two benefits that I can see to having a diverse kind of research group workforce. Firstly is like, you just get stuff done better. Like there's swathes of research that diverse teams, people from different parts of the country, different upbringings, all bring different like angles and aspects to solving problems together. So a really silly and cheesy kind of like parallel that I really like is I saw someone talk about in the US, people from warmer climates keep ketchup in the fridge, and people from cold climates keep it in the cupboard. So when you're thinking of like, oh, what goes with ketchup? People from the warm climates will be like, oh yeah, ketchup goes with mustard, goes with mayonnaise. People from warm climates will be like, oh, it goes with vinegar, it goes with salt, it goes with herbs. And that's like a really silly thing that was used to illustrate this point to children, that like you literally have different experiences, you will solve the same problems differently, you will think, the creative flow will be completely different. And it also, by having that workforce, you encourage people from a range of backgrounds to come. It's kind of like a self-perpetuating thing. So like for me, witnessing, you know, like women with children being supported in raising a family, and you know, being flexible around that. Hearing people discuss their different religious traditions like makes me comfortable discussing mine. And yeah, seeing people, you know, silly things like putting pronouns in email footers, like just seeing those things around me, for me personally, like make me feel more welcome. And there's like a whole range of things like that are important. So yeah, diversity is one thing, but then representation is like another thing that's important to do together.
Thank you all. Your analogy, Helena, is excellent, but I'm afraid it's maybe a little bit hungry for dinner. But anyway, to finish off this little point of the discussion, I believe, Mia, you have a personal anecdote that you wish to share with us on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about the importance of representation, like everyone has already mentioned, I know for me, right, so there's all of this kind of like research and this rich literature that talks about just the alienation and isolation that can be experienced by people of color in higher levels of education, right? And I know for me, that was not lost on me by any means. That was a large part of my experience, which, you know, I'll talk about a little bit later. But the importance of representation, my major professor is someone who looks like me, right? So even in those moments of doubt and uncertainty and isolation, all these things, I could look to her and, you know, see the work that she's doing, see just how brilliant she is, and seeing how she's passing along these tools to me. One, it gave me confidence to be able to say, oh, I can do this, right? Because someone who looks like me is in this space and is doing it. But then two, it showed me the importance of passing that on, right, to someone else, and not holding those tools to myself. I would like to say too, though, in addition to the importance of that representation, it does often fall on marginalized people to create that inclusivity, right? And so it you know, it shouldn't be the only woman of color among faculty to make the women of color students feel included, right? And so that should be everybody's job, right? Like we should all be taking that on and recognizing, you know, our privileges and these different things, so that we can really help provide an inclusive space to everyone that's in our research environment, right? And within our departments and disciplines at large.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Mia, that very personal experience. So overall then, the consensus of the panel is that building a diverse research environment is something that can benefit us all, be it exposure to different cultures, gaining new perspectives to problem solving, creating a sense of belonging, or just learning about other cultures through friendly discussion. And also, one observation I'm certainly going to take away from your responses is the importance of mentors. And a couple of you have spoken about the impact that mentors have had personally. And it appears that just having someone there, be it your supervisor or someone, some other academic, or even just another PhD student, or even someone outside of your academic life, someone there who really takes the effort to understand you and your background, can have such a positive impact on our not just our research lives, but it can make us feel a lot better in general. But anyway, I'd like to continue with another question for our panelists. So panelists, was representation and diversity a factor that you took into consideration before applying for your research project or other roles?
Right, I think I'll start. So for me, no, personally, I did not consider simply because I was used to the dynamics. I came here to do my bachelor's first, to do my Ecuadorian scholarship. And you're used to, at least people from Ecuador or South America, I think in general, you're used to coming to a place where there's not many like you, or many don't speak like you or look like you, or there's simply no representation in a way. So I didn't consider it for this particular role. I wish I had, though. After going through my experience in bachelor's, there's an initial cultural shock of everyone behaving different, and it's just nothing is like home. So you do feel like you don't belong. And like Mia was saying, you tend to go into isolation or try to find people from your representation groups. Like for me, I tend to find Latin American people, which isn't great for collaboration. Since we're focusing on research, it's not ideal, because in research, like I said, I've only known one person from Ecuador who's doing a PhD in the whole university. So yeah, I didn't really consider it, but I wish I had. People from Ecuador were not used to thinking about these topics, because everyone is diverse in a way, and diversity and racism there is a completely different matter that goes to so much different deep depths and layers. But here, yeah, I never considered I will affect my work in mental health and in all these situations. But yeah, it's something that we just don't talk about. So no, I didn't consider it.
Yeah, I definitely didn't consider it either. But I think I just put that down to the fact that I'm white. I think the fact that I knew I was applying for a PhD with a female supervisor, I guess I knew I wasn't going to be the only woman, so it just didn't even factor into my decision, to be fair. I also applied to be in a PhD group with a male supervisor. I didn't think about it, and I think that's probably like a privilege that most white people don't realize that they have. It's not even a thought, I guess, when you're doing the application process. At least it wasn't for me. And I think when I was in undergrad, that was really the biggest shock, when I realized how different it was being from, like, you know, a poor working class background. But by the time I had got to the PhD level, I was so used to it, it just wasn't a problem anymore. It's almost like I kind of had learned how to be in those situations, so it wasn't an issue. But yeah, I think, yeah, I definitely didn't think about it, and I would put that down to definitely to the fact that I'm white.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it directly, in that I very much had maybe a not good enough view of my own ability. I was a bit like, I'll take what I can get. But I definitely narrowed down where I was prepared to live based on whether, like, say, I was up against it with my research group, which I'm not, fortunately, that there would be like a scene or like people to support me. So there was a limited number of places I was prepared to move to for 4 years, without the knowledge that there was like a solid and safe like Jewish community or LGBT scene, hence why I've ended up in Manchester. But when I was an undergraduate, the story was really different, because I did physics, and even in the best case, like, you get maybe like 30, 70 female undergraduate students, and I remember like really noticing when it was like a real problem. So I went around different universities. I remember feeling like really jarred by undergraduate cohorts with that were like loads of men. So yeah, but that obviously diminishes as you go through your career stages. So by the time I was at like PhD level, I kind of like had just accepted that, specifically with like gender split in like maths and physics, like I wasn't going to win anywhere there. So I kind of looked for it like in a sideways way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, similar to Helena, representation was extremely important to me when I was making my decision. I was very intentional about looking at the history of the universities that I was looking at and choosing from when it comes to faculty of color and students of color. I was also very intentional and took into consideration that my current institution was the only institution that had faculty of color. So that was also a very big influence, right? I mentioned that my major professor, advisor, and mentor is someone who looks like me, and that was very important. But it was also important for me to be able to, similar to what Helena shared, just looking at the safe spaces that I would be able to have in whatever city I lived in, right? So at the university, do they have a Black Graduate Student Association? Right? Like, do they have a safe space for me on that campus? But then outside of that campus, would this be a safe environment for me? Would this be a place where I can find community and find, people to bond with and feel seen by outside of my academic community, right? So all of that was very important to me when I was making my decision to come to the University of South Carolina.
Thank you, panelists. So based off your responses, we actually have a 50-50 split on whether or not you considered diversity before applying for your PhDs. At this point, we are going to see if that ratio is reflected in our audience. And I'm going to hand over to Davide to reveal the second poll for our audience to answer. And the question is identical, and that is whether you considered representation or diversity before applying for your PhD or current role. And we will share those results shortly. Moving on now to our next question for our panelists. Now for this, it would be interesting to see if there are differences in answers between Mia and Helena, who did consider diversity and representation before applying, and Joel and Lauren, who didn't. So perhaps if we could start, if we could hear from both pairs in order, starting with Mia and Helena. And the question is this: how did you feel at the start of your PhD? And was representation and diversity a contributing factor to those feelings?
Yeah, so my first 2 years in particular were very hard for me. I experienced a lot of isolation, just a lot of imposter syndrome, which all PhD students, I'm sure, know a lot about, right? Just this feeling of like, you're going to be found out, you're not really supposed to be here, all of these types of things. But we know that that's also heightened for students that come from marginalized backgrounds as well, right? So I was the first, or I am the first in my family to be navigating at this higher level of education. So I was figuring that out. I'm, like I mentioned, the only student of color in the department, so I'm figuring that out, all of these different things. And then, when you look around, you don't really see people who look like you in the space. And that really impacted my self-esteem, right? And so, but like I mentioned, my major professor, I was able to really build a relationship with her, and that was helpful to keep me moving and keep me grounded within that space. But it was still very difficult, right? And it wasn't just me looking around the classroom or looking around my office and not seeing someone who looked like me. Even when I was looking at the readings, I was being given the theories that I'm learning, right? I did not see myself represented. I had to do a lot of independent research and a lot of, independent learning, if you will, to be able to really find out who I was as a researcher, because I wasn't getting that from that space, right? And so although representation in the form of my major professor was huge for me, and just, building back up my self-esteem and all of that, it was still super difficult not having that representation within that space.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Imposter syndrome is such a big part, it's still a big part for me of my my PhD, and I can't say that imposter syndrome is my imposter syndrome is entirely caused by feeling out of place or feeling like a lack of representation, but there are days where I feel like it certainly doesn't help. I also get what I think is sometimes called spotlight syndrome, where you basically think everyone's looking at you, and that really isn't helped by feeling like you stand out in any way that's not good. So I definitely felt a lot of that at the start of my PhD. Part of that is just, you know, building some sense of confidence and like carving your place in your research group and not proving your worth, people getting to know your skills and appreciate you and your skill set, and yeah, getting to know you know, LGBT academics and colleagues, some of whom are on this call, and them just kind of like either maybe not even directly talking about the issues that we face, but just like a sense of silent solidarity, and building those relationships has been like really helpful.
Okay, yeah. So I think when I kind of first started my PhD, I think I felt a bit out of my depth at first, but I never put that down to anything to do with diversity or thought that was a contributing factor whatsoever. But I definitely as well questioned my own abilities a lot. I think most people feel like that. But when I was in my second year, and my third year, me and another PhD student, we decided to organise an event for International Women's Day, because as I was kind of spending more time in academia, I was just like seeing more and more little things that were just like not sitting right with me. Like for example, if there was like, you know, a group of academics in a room that came to a specific talk, and then like on group chats, people might say things like, oh, look, all the big dogs are here. And then they would name like just the male academics, whilst there's 2 female academics sat in the room as well. And it was just a bit like, do you not register that they even exist? And it was just things like that were just getting more and more like frustrating. And then I think the RSC came out with the Breaking the Barriers report, which was like all about women in chemistry, and some of the statistics were just like shocking, and some of the comments as well that were made by anonymous men was just shocking. And it was like, you know, about maybe women just aren't the best chemists, and it's just, yeah, it's horrible to read. And I think I was just becoming more and more frustrated with that as I was experiencing it. And then I think in doing like quite a lot of research into that, I think I'm still at a place of privilege in that I can find other female academics if I need to, and I can find other female you know, students and things like that. I can find that. And I think you know, when you look at research groups and when you look at chemistry, like that's all I can really speak for, I think it becomes more and more apparent that there's like almost nobody of colour in anybody's research group, and even more specifically Black students, there's hardly any. And again, obviously I've done my undergrad at Leeds and done my PhD at Manchester, and in both those universities I have never in chemistry seen a Black academic. And yeah, I just think that's such a huge problem, and I've spoken to people about that as well, and I don't know one other person that knows any Black chemistry academics. So yeah, I think that is just, yeah, a huge problem at the moment.
Yeah, taking the point of everyone that just mentioned, I definitely agree. You, as a PhD student, you always have that feeling that you're entering a group that is already formed in a way, but when you look differently to these people, it's even harder. The challenge becomes wider. These feelings get enhanced. So yeah, when I first joined, I did feel like I didn't really belong. And coming from such a small country like Ecuador and developing countries, I think that happens as a general rule, that you take this problem on your own. You don't really talk about these things, and you sort of feel like you're born with the responsibility of just, you know, working as hard as you can to try to represent your country on your own, to inspire other people to just, you know, come and follow those paths. But there's no really people that you can look up to. So that is a problem, definitely, that I've encountered. every time I meet that even one person that speaks Spanish, it's like it makes my week. So it's great, but yeah, that's my initial feelings throughout it. It wasn't like, yeah, I didn't belong, which leads you working in isolation, like Mia said, which is terrible. PhDs are already tough. It's a long journey that you don't want to take on your own. So these things make it much more difficult. And there's so many ideas, so many collaborations that are escaping simply because there's no connection with your group. So yeah, I just hope that we can motivate other people to come and to follow our steps and simply enhance the diversity within our groups.
I hope so too, Joel. Thank you very much. And thank you all panelists for your experiences. So I think we can see a recurring theme arising here from everyone, namely these difficulties in trying to gain a foothold in your research group and trying to find a place where you belong within it. But it's interesting to see how perhaps a lack of representation to start with can exacerbate those feelings. So moving on, I think we will now reveal the results of our second poll. So Davide, I believe you are in charge of showing that for us. Okay, so those are the results. So 29 of you did not take representation and diversity into consideration before applying, and 13 of you did. So I can say I might put my own comment in here, reiterating from Lauren's point, as a white man and from Britain, that yes, I think it's very easy to kind of take for granted the opportunities that you can get, especially in the UK, when you look at however many world-class universities there are. And I think that with every passing day performing my research, I just find myself forever more grateful and fortunate to be in the position that I am. And in many ways, there's always sort of a responsibility to kind of uphold that and make sure that you're performing your research in the most integral way. But anyway, enough about me. I think whilst we're on the subject of polls, poll for everyone to answer. So Davide, I think, is going to show that for us. Excellent. So question is, do you feel comfortable discussing diversity with your peers? And we'll let that keep ticking over for a little bit. And back to the discussion now. So the title of this webinar raises the question, can the academic research environment ever be truly diverse? Now, of course, achieving a truly diverse academia is not easy, or we wouldn't be here talking about it. But given the benefits of diversity in academia, as laid out by our panelists, it is nevertheless something well worth aspiring towards, which leads nicely on to my next question for our panelists. So do you think that there are some types of representation that are more easily achievable than others?
I think, I guess on the surface of it, when you look at academic groups, it seems as though it's easier or it's happening more to get women into academia and into these places where they might not have been before, or where there's basically none of them now. So yeah, I think I can only really speak for chemistry, and I think it's like 6% of all chemistry academics are women. So clearly, it's like not very good. But yeah, I think I think there's a lot of things going on now as well for women. So, like organising events for International Women's Day and things like that. And I think that there's always something you can get involved in. And I don't know whether that is also available for people, like, for example, for people of colour, because, the representation just isn't there. And I think one of the main things I would say is that I think a lot of people think that if they are not that person, it's therefore not their responsibility to kind of, I guess, strive towards that. Like, I think a lot of the time when you look at women talking about their experience, you know, they always say it's not just a woman's job to get more women in academia, this is everyone's job, it's a man's job too. And a lot of men feel like that as well. And I think people need to realize that it's the same for people of color as well. So you have to also be an advocate for that as well. You can't just stay silent just because it's not affecting you, because, you know, when you look around you, you're not affected by it because you're just seeing people like you everywhere. Whereas there's a lot of people that aren't experiencing that and are not being able to get into these places, and even just because they don't see someone that looks like them, so therefore as a child you don't, you know, you're growing up and maybe not thinking that is a space for you when it should be. And so I think, yeah, I think the main thing is that I think it's everybody's job to make to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree, to be honest. Gender and sexual identity disabilities are some of the main issues that could be tackled by all of us, really. It's like Lawrence says, I 100% agree. It's everyone's responsibility to be open and honest and talk about this, celebrate these things, make the people who are less lows, like, for example, there was somebody just put an example that there could be someone with disabilities like dyslexia, some of the disabilities that are not really recognized unless you actually talked about. So these things can be addressed by us, but I do feel like there's some of it that are more difficult, like social economical status. For example, people from developing countries who would love, or they don't even have that dream. You're not born with the idea that you can achieve something like coming to this country. I speak from personal experience and from what I've gathered throughout my environment in my years in Ecuador. You don't really dream that high. You don't really think that there's a possibility for you to get out there. So those are definitely more harder to achieve because you have international fees, which are 3 to 4 times more expensive than for Europeans. So you have a massive barrier right there. And even if you get a scholarship, it's difficult to fund yourself to live in a country like this. So definitely very difficult and competitive in higher education, and the higher the level, the more difficult it is to address these issues. So yeah, my response is there are some that we could address and some others that need a lot of more work. And yeah, like Lauren said, all of our recognition and all of us working together towards it.
Yeah, I think that obviously achieving diversity in general is a huge task, and achieving like different kinds of representation obviously face different challenges. There are different structural barriers in place to different marginalized folks to access not only like getting a foot in the door, but getting education, getting the resources, getting the connections needed to be successful in academia. I think we need to take a step back and like think. I'm talking from like a sort of physics and maths perspective, and we need to like think about like decolonizing education and thinking about like critically thinking about the way we educate to think critically. I think there's like a perspective within like maths and physics, like undergraduate education, that is just like objective truth and science is science, and it's kind of like can wash its hands of like politics. And I remember learning about George Green of Green's functions. He was like a miller, and he sat in a mill in Nottingham just thinking about maths, and he wrote a paper. He was self-taught, and I remember the lecturer being like, this guy was a genius, like he was so incredible, like we don't get geniuses like this anymore. And I was like, yeah, but he had a wife or like a woman partner, like cooking his meals and cleaning his clothes. And like I felt like nobody was thinks about these things in a science and maths context, because it's not discussed in that way. So I think it's like kind of critically thinking all the things, rethinking all the things we think about where we educate in STEM would be really helpful in those fields.
Yeah, I feel like you all said everything. So, I mean, I'm in complete agreement with all of you. You know, I think I think, you know, you really have to think about what the goal is. And I think that's going back to something Helena said in the very beginning. If the goal is diversity, right, at the very surface level, so having a bunch of just different types of people, right, and we can think about all these different aspects and identities in which we can do that, then it's difficult, but it's not, and like, you know, that is something that can, I think, be a little bit more easily done in some aspects. But I think if you're getting to inclusivity, if you're getting into, you know, breaking down these structural barriers that we've been talking about, well, that's where the real work comes in, right? That is where, going to Lauren's point, we all have to do the work, right? We all have to be paying attention to what our privileges are and where we have advantages, where other folks may be disadvantaged, right? And I know like a big part of that, for me specifically, is just taking the tools that I'm gaining in an attempt to break down some sort of structural barrier, right? I'm only one person, I know, but the tools that I'm gaining from this space, taking it back to the community, right? So making knowledge accessible to people who haven't been able to get in that space yet. And also going back to representation, I think even just being in the presence of the community, specifically my community, at a local level, makes a big difference to people, to be able to see, you know, going back to representation, to be able to see like, oh, I can achieve this thing, right? There are people in this space that looks like me. Is also a huge aspect of it as well. And so, you know, just to tie a nice bow on what all three of you have already shared, that is my take on that.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you, panelists. For the sake of time, I think we'll quickly reveal the results of the final poll, please, Davide. So do you feel comfortable discussing diversity with your peers? So I think the majority of you are comfortable, so that's excellent. I'd like to conclude the discussion portion on a constructive note. So these talks are great for hearing other people's perspectives, but the issues, including those relayed by our panelists today, are only resolved by action. And with that, I will now ask our panelists to give us some advice and encouragement to address our concluding question: what can we do as individuals to develop a more diverse workforce in the research community?
Well, on an individual level, on a small scale level, there's loads of things. There's loads of little things we can do. And the main one is having discussions like this and passing the information around, saying, oh, I saw this really interesting thing, thinking about something really stupid that's not diversity per se, is in biological sciences, just the use of like male animals as default. Like that really annoys me. And I kind of brought it up with my supervisor and we had a really interesting discussion of it. And how that trickles down into like clinical medicine. I have an anecdote. In my department last June, we got a round email on June is Pride Month, and we got an email with a version of the logo that everyone has in their email footer that was like recolored to be a rainbow, and the email said, "This is a logo for you to use during Pride Month. Remember to take it down when July begins." And that was it. That was the whole thing. There was no, it was during the pandemic and people were using Zoom. And I thought, like, you know, ask people to use their pronouns on Zoom. You know, that's like a very simple thing that could have accompanied this completely tokenistic gesture. And I was really mad about it. And I just think that we need to think more carefully about actions and whether they're meaningful or not, and making a meaningful difference to people on campus and like more broadly. We also, on like a bigger level, I think we need to be giving funding and attention, both in terms of money and in terms of publishing, to workforces and groups led by marginalized individuals. And people, you know, will come back and say, oh yeah, well, good research is from good ideas. And we know that that's not true. We know it's it takes funding and also emotional labor to be able to produce really, really good research. And emotional labor definitely isn't helped by a lack of funding. So I think we need to be more proactive in encouraging folks from marginalized identities, and like obviously, you know, not the places that conventionally publish a lot to have more output.
Yeah, like I said before, I think yeah, one of the main things is the fact that it's everybody's job to you know, everybody needs to take action to work on these things, not just those who were affected by it. Like, for example, one time I was at a conference in Lincoln, and there was like a panel event a bit like this, but obviously not on Zoom, and yeah, it was all women. I think there was one man, but it was they were talking about like women in supramolecular chemistry. So, you know, it was interesting, and, you know, they were answering some cool questions. And then there was a guy in the audience, this black guy, and he asked a question about what we can do as a research community to, you know, encourage more black people to pursue chemistry and to make that avenue more accessible to black people. And there was a female academic on the panel that you know, I don't know whether the question irritated her, but she made it very clear, she was very abrasive with it, that if he wants to do something about that, then he should go away and do it himself, the same way that she has to form this group of women on the front of this panel session. And I just thought it just frustrated me so much, because I thought that she thinks that her job is now done because she's sat up there with a load of women. But if you look at the audience that was sat there, probably 50% of the audience were women. But if you look at the audience there, probably 99% of them were white. He was probably one of two black people that were at this conference alone. And I just think, yeah, one of the main ways is to definitely not just think it's not nothing to do with you because you don't look like that person, or to think that just because you've done something, therefore your job is done. So yeah, I think that's probably the main thing, I think, for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I appreciate Helena bringing up, because, you know, sociologists. So I appreciate that structural, right, attention to how we can be breaking down barriers. And, you know, just kind of echoing what both Helena and Lauren have already shared. I think as PhD students, and those not at the faculty level yet, we can feel this sense of powerlessness when it comes to how can we change our surroundings, right? How can we make this space more inclusive? How can, you know, we really advocate for some sort of change? And I think a huge part of that, you know, and I always think of these types of things as kind of like within the realm of privilege and disadvantage, right? So it's like, I think acknowledging our privileges, right? To Lauren's point, it is everyone's job to make this space inclusive. And that is something that we on an individual level can accomplish, right? I can recognize the ways that I experience privilege, right? From being cisgender, heterosexual in a space where my peers who are of different sexualities are marginalized, right? I can recognize that, and then I can do my part to help lift their voice in the same way that white students can do their part to lift the voices of people of color in their spaces, and to, you know, and we can think of that in a number of different ways in which we, you know, if someone is differently abled, right? All of these different things, we can think of ways that we can lift up our peers' voices, and we can really advocate for them in a number of ways. If you're in, I can think of a time when I was sitting in a seminar, right, and someone shared something that was transphobic, right? And I spoke up about that, right? Because that is what we should be doing. We should be carrying this for each other, right? It's everybody's issue, not whether you're impacted by it or not. That's not what we're looking for. So just being sure that we're all remembering that we do have a role, that we can speak up for one another, we can advocate for one another, we can advocate for more inclusive spaces. You know, whether that's talking to chair of your department, whether it's talking to, you know, your supervisor or the PI on your research project, you are not powerless within this. Is it more difficult as a PhD student versus a faculty member? Sure, but you're not powerless. You do have a role that you can play in changing and advocating for that change.
Yeah, just to quickly summarize, basically, because everything was said, I agree with you all. But I do believe that we can do on an individual level a lot of work, actually. I think we can make a lot to make everyone feel included in the group, to make the most out of the little diversity that we already have in our groups. So there should be more structural ways of putting us together to get to know what everyone's working, to communicate our work, share our thoughts, our experience, and even our feelings to a point, which is not normal for people from where I come from, for example. But I also believe that we have to raise our voices, like Mia was saying. If someone from Ecuador knows that I'm right here doing a PhD, that is gonna create a chain of events of bringing more and more people, which, you know, is gonna slowly help the problem. But yeah, I'm also with Lauren and Helena in terms of the funding that needs to happen, of course, to make this happen faster. So yeah, I think that's what needs to be done.
Thank you, Joel, for finishing us off there. And thank you, panelists, for all of your insights. That brings us to the end of the discussion portion. And I hope everyone has found that useful. And I hope maybe one of the panelists said something that resonates with you. And maybe even you can go over something that you've learned. So without much further ado, I shall hand over to Davide to commence what might be quite a rushed Q&A session, because I think we're running a little bit over on time, but I'm sure we can sort us out. So Davide.
So, hello everyone. First of all, thank you to our panelists for your contribution. Now we start with the interactive section of our nice webinar, and the chat now is open to everyone. So if you would like to ask questions in the chat, you can also ask them like yourself. Just please be sure to keep your camera off for GDPR reason once we'll release the video. So I've seen someone raise their hands. Edward, do you want to ask the question?
Hello. Hi guys. Thank you for this. I hope you can hear me, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you for these little talks. It's been quite interesting listening to what you've had to say. I won't ask all the questions I want to ask because I've now accumulated about 4 pages of notes, and obviously there's not enough time for that. So I'll keep it as briefly as I can. The question I want to ask, I'll try and make it broad so that all the panelists maybe can have something to say about this. Really, the question I want to ask is, does somebody such as myself, who is male, who is white, who is straight, for example, does somebody like me, do I count as diversity? Am I included in this this new image for how academia should be shaped in the future? And vaguely related to this, I also wanted to ask the panel what they think about meritocracies. And the way academia traditionally has worked is it's a meritocracy, so it doesn't really matter what race you are, it doesn't matter where you come from in the world. it's about doing the best possible research. And so it's quite strange to me, somebody who understands how a meritocracy, how a society built on these Enlightenment values works. It's quite strange to me to have all these new ideas coming in that say, oh, you know, a lot of the panel, you've used words like, you've described a lot of things as a problem, and you've said there's not enough diversity, which I'm assuming naively doesn't include somebody such as myself. And this is being described as a problem, and I find this a bit worrying, to be honest with you, considering how the university system is supposed to work in regards to meritocracy. So I wondered if you could maybe have any comments on this.
Yeah, I think if you, I mean, for example, there's a corridor in chemistry that you can walk down and you can look at the graduation photos from, I don't even know what year it goes back to, and if you look at them, every single person, it's just white men, white men, white men. Like, you're always going to be the standard and always going to be the majority probably when it comes to academia. And I think in terms of it being based on merits, I think it's a lot deeper than that. You really need to look at the reason why it's in all those pictures it's only white men. There has to be a reason. It's not just because white men are the smartest or because white men are the best in academia. That's just not true. And I think you really have to look at the reasons, you know, the barriers that are in place for women, for people of colour, for all these people who aren't white men. What barriers are in place that has meant that for all these years they've never been in these positions, and why is that? And I guess if it is based on merits, then by that logic it's because white men are the smartest, and I don't think that that is true at all. So, yeah.
Well, if I could just come back on that, not necessarily the smartest, as you say, but I believe it was Joel mentioned that there are more universities in, for example, Western Europe and North America than other countries which are newer along their developmental cycles. Of course, a country such as England is a very old country, so it doesn't surprise me that there are more universities in a country such as England, because you've had hundreds of years of the society to develop and evolve. So I think that's a perfectly natural thing. So I find the whole, I guess I just find this this ideology which doesn't really, you know, you haven't mentioned meritocracy at all. And you know, you've spoken about women. Well, men cannot have children, they cannot reproduce. So it's, you know, if women want to go and have a family, which I think is, you know, a noble endeavor to go and have a family, absolutely. So it doesn't surprise me that for something like academia, where if you want to make real progress, you have to be there for, you know, decades, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. If women are opting out to start families, which I think is perfectly fine, it doesn't really surprise me that there are many more men, for example.
But it shouldn't be an opt-out thing just because you want to have a family, because men are having families here, there and everywhere, and they're still doing very well in academia. And I think if you're talking about England being an old country and universities in Western countries and stuff like that, well, at undergraduate level in chemistry, the split between men and women is 50-50, and by the time you get to academic level it goes down to 6% for women, and that's because there's nothing in place for women. Number one, because there's barely any representation. Number two, because there is nothing in place for women who want to have families, but there's everything in place for men who want to do that, and that's not fair. So
well, with respect, I think that's because women are generally the primary caregivers, and obviously men cannot go, you know, men don't they don't gestate, so they can't, you know, they can take maternity leave in the you know, the sense of days off, but they don't, you know, they do not go into a hospital and give birth to a child. So a man does not need to take time off work to go and do that. So again, I just want to sort of bat the ball back onto your side of the court. I don't really understand what the issue is, because, you know, you've said many times that it's a problem that there's all these white, and you specifically say white and men, and also we've heard the sexuality argument as well. So straight white men, I would assume, is what you're mostly referring to. It strikes me almost as being a little bit, I hesitate to say this, a little bit racist, a little bit sexist. That's how it comes across to me personally. I don't know, maybe not everybody would agree, but that's personally how I feel about this.
Okay,
I don't know if you have any comment about that.
Sorry, Edward. Can one of the other panelists reply, and then we'll go to other questions? Sorry, Edward, just
yeah, sorry for taking your time. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to pose the question, you know, quite carefully, because I don't want to. It's been a good talk. I don't want to upset anybody. So yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah, Elena, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, you asked about meritocracy, and somehow we ended up talking about childbirth. So I don't really know. But on meritocracy, and the kind of utopian notion that good, as I sort of gestured to earlier, that good ideas are rewarded based on their goodness and their goodness alone. To have good ideas and to propagate good ideas as an individual or as a research institution or as a group, or you need to have resources. That can be physical resources, funding, microscopes, equipment, lab coats, whatever you may call it. You also need to have more holistic resources, like, you know, people need to have childcare, both men and women need to have childcare. People need to have time, and to have maybe to have their sort of departmental needs managed well. So, you know, some universities are heavy teaching universities, which take away from the quality of research, etc. So, you know, the idea of a meritocracy in a quite an unjust system is naive and kind of flawed. So
sorry, yeah. Can I just come? Do you not have access to equipment? Because it sounds like what you're describing here is almost corruption, because if you don't have access to these things, obviously that's not okay. So is it the case that you don't have access to equipment you need because you're Jewish or a woman, for example?
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, and sorry, Edward, but I don't want to monopolize the Q&A session, and I think we are kind of going a little bit off topic, to be completely honest. So let's go with our next question from Dan. What do you think can be done to increase visibility and support for less visible minorities, just such as the LGBT+ community and those with less visible disabilities? Would anyone like to? No one?
So I feel like it would be a little bit repetitive of me to share, but I will. I think when it comes to heightening visibility, I think, I mean, at least within the social sciences, right? And I'm sure this could kind of lend itself to the physical sciences as well, but I think one of the things is what I mentioned earlier, but who I know for us within the social sciences, a lot of it is like, who is in the canon, right? Like, who are you teaching when it comes to theories, when it comes to methodology, when it comes to all of these things? Are you including the work of marginalized people within that, right? I think that's a huge part of visibility. I think another part is, like we've already mentioned, but just advocating for that, right? Like advocating for that visibility, speaking up when you don't see it. I've seen students challenge professors and you know, ask like, why are there no women on your syllabus, right? Like we know the contributions of women in this field. Why is that not being added? Different things like that. And so I think one, like, you know, questioning, speaking up, all of those like individual level things. And I think on an institutional level, just, you know, challenge, like an individual level, challenging our disciplines, but then the institutions can also kind of rethink the way that they have been, I guess, foundationally set, right? Once again, like who are you considering to be, I think Lauren might have used that term earlier, like the big dogs, right? Like who are you considering to be kind of like the founders of particular disciplines, particular theories, and how are you kind of negotiating and challenging what your discipline considers the standard.
I have a point about some more kind of small scale things that could be implemented to support. I'm going to think about the LGBT plus community and people with disabilities and hidden disabilities. So I just think it's really important to like critically analyze how you do what you do. So I think I've talked about pronouns and Zoom names like 3 times. It is so easy to put your pronouns in your Zoom name, and then you don't have to kind of have a trans student feel the need to like make a big deal of their pronouns if and when they need to announce them. If you have conferences like this, I know that this is being recorded so that it can be later closed captioned. This is not only useful for people with hearing difficulty, it's useful for people with specific learning disabilities and all other kinds of access needs. Thinking about how you talk about people in the third person, whether you have a gender neutral writing style or not. You know, not only is it's not you know, PC gone mad, it's not woke to use a they them pronoun in writing about someone you don't know about. It's just factually correct. And when you talk about people in person as well. So I just think the thinking about the really small day-to-day things, you know, showing signs of solidarity silently and with your just everyday actions can go so far to help people with hidden kind of marginalized identities that you can't see because they don't necessarily want to have to bring it up. They want to see it reflected around them, that people are supporting them.
Can I just say really quick? Yeah, I was going to say, I think people with hidden disabilities or anything that you can't see, they've always existed, always been there. So it's kind of like, just to I guess to feel, you know, like I guess a lot of people hid those things and maybe didn't want people to know or didn't. And I think when the representation is there, it's a lot easier to just feel more comfortable just being yourself. And I think that's important. Like everybody should feel comfortable just literally existing.
Sorry, thank you guys. We have one more question. What do you think should be done more to educate white men in the topic of equality? I don't know, like Joel, if you have, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because, yeah, I think more things like this are massively helpful because you can't really do anything about something that you don't know of. So yeah, hearing other people's point of view or what you have had to go through to get to where you are helps massively and spread the voice of why do people feel the way they feel. And it's such an important topic. So yeah, more things like this I think will be a massive help. But yeah, just talk to each other within your research groups. I'm sure you're gonna hear lots of different experiences within them as well. So there's things that you can do in an individual basis as well as a whole research community, such as events like this.
I think signposting is really important. I like to have, you know, I don't know everything. If I hear someone saying something or having, you know, expressing something that I'd find offensive or could be offensive to marginalized individuals. I don't have all the answers. I have on my computer, I have bookmarks from the Runnymede Trust, from the LGBT Foundation, etc., that I can just say, look, this is something that you maybe need to look at. I'm not going to do the work for you. Here's some starting points. Off you go. You know, I have this, for me specifically, I have this, if people misunderstand my gender, as our friend Ed did earlier, I have like 4 or 5 different hyperlinks that I just say, hey, yo, go and read this. Don't ask me any more questions. Bye. So yeah, I think it's just people need to take initiative, but you know, some people just won't unless you sort of give them a little bit to start with. So maybe that's what I like to do with when I feel like people are misunderstanding a situation.
Yeah, I just want to really echo what both Joel and Helena said. Like, oftentimes I kind of talk to people about this, and I know if the question was specific towards white men, I think all of us could learn something. We all have privileges that we have to acknowledge, and so, or we should be acknowledging rather. And so I often, once again, to echo Helena, often tell people you have to educate yourself. It's a process, right? So educate yourself on your privileges and how your privileges kind of are in contention with the disadvantages of others, right? So I think I often use the example of like me being a light-skinned Black woman, right? So like, although I am a Black woman, I do experience privileges, whether like on the individual level or at a systemic level based on my skin tone, right? That my darker skin counterparts do not attain, right? And so I acknowledge that, right? It's important to really practice empathy, to Joel's point, right? So really practicing, learning how and practicing to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Why do they think the way that they think? What is their experiences that has brought them to this place? And then circling back to what Helena shared about doing these individual tasks, these everyday things, right? That can seem tedious, but if it's going to advocate for and lift up the voices or even just help the visibility of other marginalized folks, and it's necessary, right? And so engaging in those everyday acts, right? All of those things are important. So educating yourself, working to empathize with other people, and then engaging with that on a everyday level. So that would be my advice to all of us when it comes to examining our privileges.
Okay, thank you guys, really good points. We'll go for our last question. We have Leona that would like to ask them. Oh, Leona.
Hello, yes. Thank you guys. Awesome panel today. Really insightful things. So obviously what was discussed, we saw that there was like a lack of representation from young, which decreases your ambition. We have lack of awareness of disabilities and sexual orientation, hence isolating people. We have lack of resources, including being from the correct schools, which obviously has allies to universities. Like, as you know, A-level results this year, you had some people in private schools getting grades and state schools not getting those grades. Joel said lack of ambition because where you're from, so you're not even brought up to believe you can achieve. And I agree with what Maya said, that everyone has their privilege. But regarding what some of the audiences have said, it is easy for it to be looked at white straight men as a problem, and for them to feel personally attacked. So my question is, what can white straight men, and actually all of us in general, do to feel included in a conversation so that they become allies? And what can they do to help?
I can try to be brief, but I often talk about allyship, like just plain and simple. Allyship is a verb, right? So it's about the things that you do, right? So if you want to be included, and that's all of us, once again, right? If you want to be included in these conversations of diversity and advocacy and inclusion, well, what are you doing to include yourself in those conversations, right? Because white men are not a problem, right? Like, diversity inclusion doesn't mean excluding anyone. I think that is part of when we talk about privilege and systemic privilege, it largely, I think Lauren mentioned this earlier, it often comes down to like who is often being centered and focused on within these conversations. So in the research community, that does tend to be white men that are centered and focused on. So it's not about removing white men, but it's how do we include other people who have been marginalized, right? People of color, women, et cetera. We've talked about all of these different differing identities and things like that. And so it's really just about action, right? So going back to educating yourself and engaging in these daily initiatives that you can do, in addition to, right, these more structural things that we've talked about. There are also these daily things that you can be taking a part of and just learning your role within that.
Yeah, I agree completely with what Mia just said. I think if you want to be in these conversations and you want to be constructive with it, then I think you can be if you want to be. And I think if you really want to be, you will make sure you are. And I think that is, a really important thing. Like for example, I'm pretty sure there was a paper published like in the last month that basically said if you want to get anywhere in academia, you should make sure that you have a male supervisor. And that was just like, what are we teaching people if we're publishing things like this? Like it's not constructive, it's not helpful. And I think that's a conversation in itself to talk about what isn't helpful and things like that aren't. And it's, yeah, I think in terms of, saying white men, the only reason that's said, I guess, in terms, especially what we're talking about in academia, is because when you look at the history of it, the only people that were seeming to achieve anything were white men. Like I said about that corridor, every single picture is just a group of white men, and that, that's not very encouraging for me, like, to see. I'm like, wow, look at this, like, and you have to walk a significant amount down that corridor to even see a woman. And so it is, I guess to question, well, why is that, is important if you do want to be in these conversations.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'll just jump in because we're running out of time. And we'll close our Q&A session now. So I'll hand it over to Leona again for the closing remarks. And Leona, please. Hello.
Sorry about that. Classic Zoom mistake. Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who attended today. There was lots of lively discussion here today, lots of important topics raised. There's never going to be a perfect answer to any question that's raised, but at least we got to hear a lot of different perspectives, both from the audience contribution and from our panelists, because whether people agree with comments or not, it's important that those comments are made so that we can discuss them. So thank you to everyone who asked a question today, and thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you to our panelists for making time to speak to us today. So that's the end of the webinar. The recording will be made available later. We'll also be emailing a survey through Eventbrite just to get some feedback from you as the audience. Keep an eye out for our next webinar, which will be discussing loneliness. The title is Loneliness an Unavoidable Part of a PhD? If you follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter at PhDiscuss, we'll be updating you all regularly. If I can ask the panelists to stay on the call, everyone else is now free to leave. So thank you again.